and welcome back to our weekly live stream. We are here every Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. PST. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about how devs and teams work on massive projects together. So if you have any questions related to this, you're welcome to pop them in the chat and we'll be answering them today. So we'll get our creators on here and we'll get started, which is really exciting. I'm excited to dive into some of these questions. It will be a little bit of a shorter live stream today just to give everybody a heads up, but make sure you follow along for our content. Hi Ziad, how are you doing? Pretty darn good. I feel like the first half of the week went by so fast, which is awesome. So really looking forward to the weekend. It's finally nice where I am. It's like 30 today, which is ridiculous. So I'm really happy that we can get out in the sun. Hi Dweez, how are you doing? Pretty darn good. I was just telling Ziad it's finally nice where I am, so hopefully gonna enjoy the sun this weekend. I was just telling everybody that our topic today is how teams and devs work on massive projects together. So we'll just dive right into some of these questions. It'll be a little bit of a shorter live stream today just because there's only two of you answering questions, but we'll get through it. And if anybody has any questions that they want to throw into the chat based off this topic, you're more than welcome to, and we'll make sure we answer them. So our first question today is, how does a group of devs work simultaneously on one project together? So if you have an example of a project or like building an app and how different moving parts work, that would be great to hear. So let's hear Ziad first. I can hear you fine. Uh, that's weird that our audience can't hear
Hello, hello,
us.
hello.
No sound. Maybe it's on my
Oh,
end here. No volume. Mute mic off and on. Okay, can everybody hear us now? Maybe
yeah.
now. Now I
Yep,
can hear.
now.
Okay, maybe it was just an issue with my audio there. So I'll just repeat that whole thing. Hopefully that we upload this to YouTube after, so hopefully it didn't cut out for sound for that. But I could hear everybody, so maybe it was just an issue with my technology. But our topic today is how teams and devs work on massive projects together. And the first question was, how does a group of devs work simultaneously on one project together? So giving an example of a project like building an app and how those different moving parts work. So Ziad, go back to what you're talking about there.
Yeah, so when someone builds an app, really it's like you have a bunch of teams, or even if it's one team, working with the same code base. And the key there is what's called source control in the industry. And you can kind of think about it like, I'm sure everybody's kind of used Google Docs, for example. You can kind of imagine that there's different versions of the same Google Doc, and each person is kind of working on their own little version. So what happens is there's like one version that is called like the master version, right? And that's like the code base that everybody knows it's working, it's it's fully functional, and it's out there. But then let's say someone like me on the team wants to add like a new feature. They want to change the color of the screen or the background or something in the app. What then happens is I create a new version of that master version and call it like Ziad's version. And I start working on it, and I make a lot of changes. I change the colors and I do my thing. And, sometimes that Ziad's version could be broken. It could have issues with it, but it's fine because it's only my version. Nobody else can see it. But then once I have like a fully functional Ziad's version with the new feature added and everything that used to work still works and stuff like that, I basically make a request to merge my version with that master version, like the one that's fully functioning. And what typically happens in big companies or like big engineering teams is that other people will like review those changes. They'll like go in and double check that you're not destroying everything and make sure that everything is still working. And if everything looks good, then they kind of give it the thumbs up, and the my version becomes the new master version. So now when anybody else wants to make a change, they can take a new version of that and make their changes. So you can kind of imagine this at scale, like when you have hundreds of engineers working on like a mobile app or a website or something like that. Each person on that team can have their own version. They can have, different, a version of their version. You can have like a lot of different cool things, but that's essentially how it works. That's again, it's called source control. So it's like, you're controlling the source of the code that each person has. So it's a concept that's been around for a while, but there's definitely many challenges and pros and cons and stuff like that of different organizations do different things. So yeah, we can kind of talk more about that, but that's kind of the general gist of how engineering teams work on like a specific project like that.
That was a fantastic overview. I feel like you broke that down extremely well to where like I can fully understand that. So thanks for giving that explanation. That's fantastic. I just wanted to give everybody that's joining here just a heads up. Our topic of the day is how teams and devs work on massive projects together. Because I feel like obviously it's not confusing anymore now that Sia broke it down, but I feel like this can be kind of confusing from an outside perspective. So make sure you follow along with us. Click that follow button. We're here every Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. PST. So Dweez, I'm going to throw that question to you if you have anything else to add to it. Maybe you could give a different example that Sia did or a real life example that you maybe worked on, but feel free to take the floor.
Yeah, yeah, of course. So there's kind of different formats that people could use. Like for example, an engineering organization might choose
Oh,
to
hold
force.
on. There might be another sound issue. I don't know what's happening with the sound today. I hear people in the chat are like, I can't hear you.
Mm,
Okay.
uh, oh, they can't hear Dweez.
That's
Dweez, can
weird
you
because I
try
can hear
try
you.
muting and unmuting Dweez? Because that kind of helped me.
No, I've just muted, unmuted.
Can everybody hear him now? We're watching the chat closely here.
Yeah, keep talking, Dweez.
No,
Right on.
yeah, yeah,
Yes,
great.
okay.
Weird.
Okay.
Very strange.
Yeah.
Well, keep us updated, people in the chat. If you guys can't hear us at some point, I don't know what is happening today. We might have to end the live and come back because just strange things are happening. But hopefully all those issues are solved. Sorry, Louise, back to you. You're asking Ziad a question.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, I asked Ziad, what
Mhm.
are the pros and cons of source control?
Yeah, so what I was saying is that different engineering organizations might like have different formats that they want to do. So for example, I mentioned that whenever a new engineer wants to work on like a new feature, they create a new version and start working on it. That's like what I'm used to. But for example, other engineering organizations might say that each person, like each engineer, will just have like have their own version that's just going to be like for all features that they ever work on, and they don't like create like a new version every single time they do a feature, right? So a pro of that is that you have less versions out there, for example. Another pro of that is like, for example, like who's working on each individual set of changes more clearly. So it's like different organizational structures like that might have pros and cons to them. A really big one, honestly, is when it comes to deployment. So basically, what happens is like, let's say that we're working on a mobile app, like Olivia was talking about, right? And what happens is that like I finished a new feature and somebody give me the thumbs up and I merge that into the master version. Now the master it has that new feature that I work on. There comes a question now, like when should we basically deploy that to production? Like for example, Instagram, if they create a new feature like the notes feature, I don't know if you guys have seen that, but that's like a new feature that they made. So somebody, went and created their own version of the code over there. They made that feature, they merged it in. Now the question is like, should we release that to the public or should we like test it ourselves first? So like, what should we do? So for Instagram, I don't know if you guys noticed, but they did what's called like a slow rollout, which basically means that they released it to like only a set of users first, made sure that everything was working, everything like people actually liked it, they wanted to gather some data on that. and then they started releasing it to more and more people after they kind of found that out. A lot of companies will do also what's called dog fooding, and basically what dog fooding means is that they will only use the thing internally first, and then they will roll it out. So for example, like a company like Facebook, they might only give a feature to people who work at Facebook to have that on their own Facebook accounts. And they know it's okay if something breaks because like everyone within Facebook can kind of understand that they're just testing this, right? And then they roll it out to other people. So that also is like a pretty big I would say it's a hot topic when it comes to like managing engineering organizations. And by the way, these decisions are made by like the higher ups, like the VPs of engineering at Instagram or whatever are the ones making these decisions. And the engineers are just following like protocols that are set in place. So that's even like why a lot of people will get like very high paying, high position jobs at these companies is because they've probably worked at so many different engineering organizations and have kind of learned what some of the best practices are when it comes to things like this, like source control, for example. So yeah, Dweez, does that kind of give a little bit of an overview on that?
Thank you. Perfect.
Awesome.
Yeah, that was a great explanation. Thanks.
Definitely.
Cool.
I was gonna say that's really interesting. I did not know like that's how they do it. And dog fooding is such a strange term in my opinion for that. But again, just like learning something new every day. That's really cool. Tech is just so interesting, like all these intricacies of organizations. So thanks for sharing that. The great question, Dweez. I want to say whoever is gifting the guys, thank you so much. Like, if you like their answers or if you really want somebody to talk, you're welcome to gift them and we'll throw them on the floor. So thank you for that. So our next question is, what does that initial assessment or project overview look like? So I guess you kind of explained that pretty well with like grabbing a source, but is there any other ways that they kind of do that with breaking up the project, I guess, like even within the different scopes of work and like different suggestions? So like if the user, let me break it down. Sorry, I'm talking for a long time, but like say there is a customer suggestion and the team's like, okay, we really need to implement this. Like, how do they decide which team gets that? And how do they decide like how they're going to kind of adopt that into, let's go with the app suggestion. I guess that's the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I actually have a pretty good example of this. So if you have like a really big feature that you want to implement, like if we're taking the notes feature in specific, like it looks really simple when you use it on Instagram, but like a lot of engineering work had to go into like making something like that. And the issue that a lot of engineering organizations will face is that there's like a lot of code that needs to be reviewed and needs to like I mentioned that when someone wants to make a change, someone else has to like approve it and give it the thumbs up and say that like it's good, it looks good to me, basically. Now that's simple when you're making like five lines of code or something of changes, right? But Dweez, you've seen like what it looks like when you have an entire like file that's been changed or like huge lines of code that have been changed. It's really easy to miss something, right? And that's how like bugs arise. So what happens when you have a feature that like a customer requests, like the notes thing, for example, like they learn that that's what they want to do, is basically they will take the master version that I mentioned, like the Google Docs master doc or whatever, and they'll just make one version of it and call it like the notes version. This is the version that will contain all the work related to notes. And then they hand it off to a team. They say like, all right, here you're a team of like 5 engineers. You guys are going to work on this new notes feature. This is why we want to do it. And you guys will be working off of this like notes version. Now, what happens to that is that they will make their own versions off of the notes version. So now you're going like 2 levels deep, right? You have like the master version at the top, the notes version, and then like a bunch of different versions for each engineer at the bottom, right? And then what happens from there, because the whole idea is that you don't want to have like thousands of lines of code being merged into the master version at once, especially when it comes to a company like Instagram that's like worth billions of dollars, and there's a lot of things at stake here, right? So you don't want to break anything. So what then happens is that every time an engineer makes like a little incremental change, they will request to merge it into the notes version. So you're 3 levels deep. You'll want to merge 1 level above, basically, in order to have like a little bit of lines of code reviewed at a time. So like every time someone changes 5 lines of code or 10 lines of code and they're really confident in it, then they request to merge it to the next level basically, and someone will approve that. And it's really easy to review those changes because it's not that much, right? Like it's fine. And so imagine like you have the nodes version and like five different little versions underneath it. Over time, those five little versions are, getting merged up until finally you have the final notes like features completely done. Then the final step is to merge that notes feature back into the master version. And engineers can be really confident because they know that they reviewed all the little changes at the same time. So that's like the like bad engineering organizations wouldn't do that. They would just like merge like hundreds of lines of codes like into the master version at once, and that's what causes like issues. Like if you've ever seen Instagram have a bug or Facebook have a bug, or like if you've played like any video games or something, there's like sometimes really like embarrassing bugs. That's usually like why it's like somebody missed a critical change or something when they merged it in. So like source control is definitely very, very important at the organizational level. And at the same time, like even at an individual level, and Dweez, maybe you can even talk about this as well. Like when you're just working on a side project or something like that, like it's still really important to have, like that kind of source control in order to manage your changes and make sure that you can like keep track of what you're working on.
Yeah, I with an individual project, like I remember the very, very first project I worked on, I had like no clue about like source control and anything. So yeah, I just like went on GitHub and I made an account and I did not take it into consideration. So like at the very end, like like you're just writing the code and you're running it, and because you're not really, I don't know, the versions that you work with, you're not like it's not as structured. I wasn't working in a structured manner at all with this. So at the very end, like I in my head, everything was working, right? And
Hmm.
then out of nowhere, something doesn't work anymore. And you're like, wait, but it worked just fine. That same line of code just worked just fine earlier.
Yeah.
But yeah, it had to do with like Node.js. I was using Node.js as for the runtime environment, and at the end it was such a big mess. Like I
Yeah.
just completely like left the project. It's still, I didn't ever go back to finish it because it was just a matter of, I don't know, I didn't know what I was doing. So these are like important practices, as you mentioned earlier. I
Yeah.
feel like your programming skills do matter a lot as a developer, but it's like these practices that you have with source control, it comes down to these smaller things that big companies really like take into consideration, like you mentioned earlier, Facebook, Instagram, and
Yeah.
even TikTok. So yeah, I think it's really something that we I feel like we should pay more attention to it in tech, like especially for people when they're learning.
Mhm.
I don't think enough attention is being paid to it.
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, the way that code is structured within companies, like, really determines how the company's like whether it scales well or not. Like, for example, a company like Google is huge. They have so many products, right? Like, they have search, Google Maps, Google Images. They have like Google Cloud. Like, that's like a huge part of their company. And you don't get to be like a huge company like that with so many different products by having like bad like source control. Like in the Google Docs example, Olivia, like imagine if you had all of Google's products written in like one Google Doc, like all of the code and everything. Obviously, it wouldn't scale very well. People within the company wouldn't know how to like work together and stuff like that. So, like the obvious solution is you have multiple Google Docs, right? Like
Yeah.
one for each product or something like that. But even that has debates within itself, right? Like some people choose to have a different Google Doc for each product. Another company might choose to have a different Google Doc for like one for the back end and one for the front end, right? Like that's like a thing to do. And when it comes to source control too, like when you want to merge like a new feature into the master branch. Dweez, I don't know if you've seen this, but like GitHub, for example, will let you run like actions, so that it'll like run tests for you, for example, like automatically to make sure that like this new version doesn't break the old version or something like that, right? So different, like that's how you get really good within a tech company, honestly. Like every software engineer, like if you get into tech and you work as a software engineer, everyone will know how to code, right? Like at some point, everyone will know how to code. They'll be really good at, solving bugs and stuff like that. So the way that you really like either climb the ranks or become like really invaluable to a company is knowing these practices and knowing like what the best practices are and actually like executing on them, because that's what really can like impact an entire engineering organization, right? So yeah, it is really important to us, honestly. I think like more people should like, in addition to learning how to code, even if you're not working at like a huge tech company right now, like knowing how to control, like knowing how to use GitHub. By the way, GitHub is like the technology that's used for like source control in general. So if you haven't learned GitHub yet, and you want to get into tech, go learn how to use GitHub. It's like one of the 101 things that you have to learn how to use. But yeah, the better you get at that, the more like invaluable to a company you will be.
Those are great tips. That was a great overview. I love the Google Docs example because I feel like that just like, I don't want to say dumbs it down, but just makes it a little bit easier to understand because it's a very intricate system, I feel like.
Mhm.
So thanks for answering that, both of you. So we have a couple questions in the chat that I want to jump into. So the first question I see is, where do you guys see web development jobs in the future in regards to AI? Does somebody want, Dweez or Ziad, do you guys want to jump in on this one?
Okay,
Yeah, we
yeah, you can take
yeah,
it.
you go. Yeah.
Go for it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we discussed this a lot of times actually. I will say my bit and then you get in
Sure.
it, yeah. No, but I think it will influence us a lot in the sense that it automates repetitive tasks. I think that is how it, like those smaller things that you do, like during the software development process, that you can just use AI, but it's not that we're not gonna need developers anymore. We will always need developers, but it's just that you have the AI to do like those smaller things, like checking for bugs and things like that. Um, but I do think it's gonna be a necessity. Like every developer will use AI in the future. I just don't think it will replace developers like that, but it will definitely have a bigger role.
Yeah.
Definitely. Go ahead,
Yeah, I
Zia.
just wanted to mention as well, like we've had like an hour-long discussion on this, and I think all the lives are
Yeah.
on the YouTube as well. So if you want to see like a more in-depth talk about it, I definitely check that out. But in general, I agree with Louise. I think it's going to be like a kind of like a tool that developers can use, but I don't think it's going to replace web developers altogether.
I would agree with that completely. I've done a lot of, seen a lot of articles come out on AI. Really it's just like another tool, I guess you can really just utilize in your life. Like, Notion's a tool that can help you organize, and like Monday.com is like a workflow organization. So I feel like technology is really scary in that sense. And like, even I just watched a TikTok too when the calculator first came out. Everybody was like, do we even use it? Like, it's kind of scary. Like, what's going to happen to math? And it's like, it's just a tool to kind of help you at the end of the day. So I don't think people should be scared of it. I think you should just use it to your advantage. Obviously, there are some ethical concerns around it in some aspects, but we'll get to that eventually. And I know we had a conversation on that last time. And in future weeks, we're going to be having a lot of conversations about that because it's a huge tool that's up and coming. So great answer, great overview. I'm going to answer a couple more in the chat here. So the next one is, how do you tell your team that you want to stick to one technology and you don't like to switch? So I don't know if that's regards to like devs and source code and like the type of technology, or if it's in regards to a different type of thing. If somebody, whoever asked that, if they could expand on that, that would maybe be helpful. But if the guys want to start answering it and we can kind of wait for an expansion, that would be great.
Yeah, so I think they meant here like which technology, so which language, which programming languages, which frameworks, etc. So your team, you want to tell your team you would like to stick to one technology and you wouldn't like to switch. Mm, I think if, whoever asks you at the company you are working for to switch technology, I think that as a developer, it is your duty to learn new technologies. I don't think it does, like, it eliminates the whole purpose of development if there is a developer who doesn't learn, because what will end up happening is you will be working with outdated technologies that no one uses anymore. Like, even now, there are languages, technologies that no one uses. And yeah, if it's your duty to be up to date with the latest technologies for the company you are working for, like if you are updated, that just increases your value as a developer, as opposed to, yeah, someone that chooses just to stick chooses to stick to just one technology and doesn't want to go beyond that. If you really feel like, okay, this is the technology I feel like I'm most comfortable working with, like you're using JavaScript and you that's just what you use, communicate it with them and tell them that you would like to keep using it for the time being, but not learning whatever technology they want you to work with. I wouldn't advise that. Always try to learn new technologies. It will only benefit you in the long run.
Definitely. So yeah, do you want to expand on that? If anything, I feel like that was a great answer.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I mean, I've been in a few situations where I'm presented with like just completely new things that I'm not familiar with. There was this one technology that was like a Python open source thing called Temporal, which my company was using, and I didn't even really know Python at the time. Like I hadn't worked with a lot of Python, and this like new thing was like gonna be the core of like our product, so I had to learn it. And I'm so glad that I like took the time to like, just everything's on YouTube and the internet anyways. So like I just took, like a day to like understand what the pros and cons of it were and why we were using it and what the technology was. And it kind of like opens your perspective. It's kind of very similar to like traveling to different places, like if you've only lived in one country like your entire life and you've never left that country ever, you will not know like how people live outside. So when you travel, you gain new perspective, you meet different people, different cultures and stuff like that. So it's pretty much the same thing with technology. It's like when you learn a new technology, you understand how other engineers looked at like a specific problem and tried to solve it, right? And that kind of enhances your ability to solve problems as well. So yeah, definitely, I fully agree with Louise. Like, don't close off your mind and say like, I only work with Java. I will never do anything else. I will only like build Java things. So yeah.
Definitely. That's honestly, those are great answers. And I see we have a lot of conversations happening in the chat here about that. So I actually have a question that kind of relates to this conversation happening in the chat about like you're kind of thrown into a situation and you're overloaded and there's lots going on. So in this conversation about how teams and devs work on massive projects together, what does that kind of look like in a small startup company versus a really big company? Because I know in a startup, because I've worked for one before, you're kind of thrown into it. There's not a lot of rules and regulations. It changes a lot. But in big companies, there's lots of policies, lots of structure in it. So I know, Ziad, you've worked for a startup before, so maybe you can shed some light on it. And then Dweez, maybe you can touch on a little bit more after as well.
Yeah, I could definitely talk about this because I've worked at both a startup and a bigger company. And what I can tell you is that like the when it comes to source control in particular, or like how organizations build like products together, in a bigger company, there's just a lot more like bureaucracy, I guess, and a lot more like rules in place to make sure that things don't break. And it all comes down to the bigger company not wanting to take risks as much as a smaller company does, because like a company like Google, they already know that like search is a great product, right? Like they know that Google like Maps is a great product, right? Like they don't need to take huge risks or huge bets on things, right? But like a smaller company, they do, right? Like they when they're introducing a new product feature as a startup, like that could be the feature that turns you into like $1 billion company, right? So they want to get it out as fast as possible. They're totally fine if things are, not as structured. So a really good example of this is like when it comes to this whole process of merging code in from like the version of the Google Doc that isn't the master into the master branch or into the master version. What happens at a bigger company is that like I could finish a feature today, but it's not going to be released to the public for like another month. And that's because it needs to go through like so much rigorous testing by, like by other engineers, by an entire department. Like at my company that I worked at that was like a bigger company, we had an entire team dedicated to like what we called the release cycle. And basically what that meant is that every time code was like they received new code that needed to be published to customers, there would be so much rigorous like testing and people dedicated to, like making sure that everything else doesn't break and stuff like that before it could go out. And they would do that thing that I talked about earlier, like dog fooding, for example, or testing with only like small batches of customers before releasing it to the public. So like when you see a feature like notes on Instagram, that feature could have been finished like 3 months ago, but they didn't actually release it until like now. Now, when you take that to a startup, it's the complete opposite. Like I could finish a feature today and it's in front of every single customer tomorrow, or like
Yeah.
literally as soon as I finish it, right? And the reason behind that is because like when I'm at Google writing code, that code is going to be seen by hundreds of millions, if not like billions of people, literally. Like I think Facebook has like 2 billion users. So like if they make like a new feature, 2 billion people are going to see it. And if it's broken and if something doesn't work, that company will like could lose billions of dollars because of like things that you did, right? But at a smaller company like a startup, like I think the product that I was working at the startup had like I want to say like 2,000 customers total, which is like it seems like a lot, but it's really not. Like it's not the end of the world if things break for like a couple hundred customers. Like you could call each one of those customers and apologize individually, like when
Yeah.
you're at a startup, right? But when you're at Google, like no, it's a huge issue if things break. You have to like now go to PR, you have to release statements, you have to like, if there was like a privacy issues, you could be facing like legal things. Like it's a really big issue. Like yeah, someone commented in the chat like Bard, for example. I don't know if you guys saw that, but there was like it didn't work basically. Like they got up in front of a presentation in front of a group of people and they presented something that didn't work. And what ended up happening is the stock dropped like I think it was like 8% or something, which when it comes to Google, that's tens of billions of dollars that just like vanished. So that's kind of like the comparison. Like startups are moving really fast, so it's okay to like break things. But when it comes to a company like a huge company, you don't want to do that because there's just so much more at stake at that point. So each engineer is definitely like more meticulous about what they can write, what they can release, how fast they can go, and stuff like that.
That's a great overview. Just more to lose at the end of the day versus like a smaller company. Like you're totally right. You can pick up the phone and call and be like, I'm so sorry. Like that was our bad. Like thanks for being, it's usually friends and family that are part of that beta test anyway. So you're totally right. I've worked for that before. So I've seen that happen in real time. Dweez, did you want to add anything on? I feel like Ziad summed that up quite nicely, but I want to open the floor just in case you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, no, it definitely is like that. I feel like startups have a bigger room for error because there's less users. Just because there are less users, if something were to go wrong with Google, yeah, customer support is gonna have a difficult time. So, yeah, that's all I had to add to that. Yeah, thank you for the answer.
Completely. That was a great in-depth answer, Ziad. This might be one of my actually, I know we talked about AI in a couple segments. This might be actually one of my most favorite conversations because we're really diving into like big companies like Google and what actually happens behind the scenes that like I wouldn't personally know. So this is a really good combo. So our next question I'm going to throw to Dweez first. So the question is from the chat. Any advice on getting your company to give you time to learn a new skill? So going back to that conversation that we're kind of having in the chat about like being thrown into lots of different new technologies, but not having the time to learn them. So Dweez, do you want to maybe touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so as Yat said earlier, it's sometimes it's not gonna take a very, sometimes it's not going to take a lot of your time, depending on the technology. Like if it's, I don't know, maybe a framework or a language, if you are working already at a company, you are a qualified developer, you have experience with in several languages or framework, then I think it's you learn things faster. It comes down to your experience. Like the more languages, for example, the easier it gets to learn new things. So, yeah, in respects to that, I don't think you're going to have to ask your company to give you time to learn it. But I do think it does come down to communication. Like, if you are not comfortable with working with whatever they presented to you should tell them that you are having a difficult time with it. And yeah, as you said, like, ask them for time to learn it. It depends on how fast you learn things. If you feel like you need another week or 2 weeks to learn it, and then after you learn it, you actually have to work with it, that's when the real learning starts. You should communicate with them what your hardships are and what you are struggling with, and yeah, find someone that knows how to use that set technology and like really use them for their mentorship. If it's a new technology that no one knows at the company, then you should be able to just ask them for a bit of time, because I don't
Definitely.
think companies can just implement a new technology and if no one knows it, they expect you to be a genius at it. I don't think it works like that. If the company is doing that, that's a bit irrational of their part, and you should just, as Dom would say, go look for a new company to work with.
Definitely. Some onboarding practices definitely need to happen in that instance if they're introducing something new and you don't have experience with it. But Ziad, I'm going to
Yep.
throw the same question to you if you want to expand. Louise, that was a great overview answer that I totally agree with it.
Yeah, can you repeat the question one more time to
Yeah,
respond?
definitely. The question is there any advice on getting your company to give you time to learn new skills?
Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, I think in addition to everything Dewey said, like finding someone who knows what they're doing with that technology and kind of like seeking that mentorship is definitely like communicate with like your manager is a good thing. Especially if you are like struggling with time. Like I saw someone in the chat said that they were like overloaded at work, which is like a big issue. So it's kind of tough to go out of the way and like learn a new technology or a new skill. So communicating with your manager is definitely important, especially if it is a skill that's gonna like help you in your actual work or like a technology that's gonna help you do better in the long run. At the end of the day, my experience with managers is that they want you like they succeed if you succeed essentially, especially when it comes to tech. Because like if the team outputs, a new feature or a really new integration or something like that, like the manager is seen to have succeeded. So communicating with your manager that like, hey, like this is something that I want to learn, like this is a new technology, for example, that we're using that I'm just not familiar with. Do you mind if I take like a few hours out of the day or something, just to learn, see what's going on here, and this is like how it's going to be useful to me. I've never seen a manager, unless like there is like some time crunch or something like that. I've never seen a manager like say no to somebody who wants to grow themselves, especially in tech, because it's like tech's kind of culture is not it's not that how do I say this? Like it's not like I know people that are like in finance or investment banking or something where everything is like a deadline and everything has to be like kind of like a cutthroat kind of culture, and that just hasn't been my experience at all. So communicating with the people around you and your communicating with the people around you and your manager is super important.
Completely agree with that. And yeah, if you have a good manager, I know I do specifically, and they're all for like learning experiences. So like I would just approach them and ask, and usually they have a budget set aside for those things too. Depends on the company. Like a really small startup, not necessarily, but you never know. Like with their funding, they definitely should have a bank of those. But completely agree with what you're saying. For those still joining us today, we have lots more questions to answer from the chat. Make sure you give our account a follow. And thank you so much for the gifts that are rolling through. We really appreciate that. We're not quite done yet. We have about like 15 minutes left. So if you have any last questions, feel free to drop them in. We have a couple we're going to answer still, but I wanted to reiterate that we are here every Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. PST, and we have all of our topics laid out for the month of May, which is really exciting. We have a couple new faces that maybe a few of you have seen, maybe a couple of you haven't. So that's really exciting that we're going to be jumping on to some new topics this month. So our next question is actually one of the questions that I have, but it was asked in the chat. So, I'm gonna phrase it up a little bit, but the question in the chat was, how does one get work allocated to them for somebody that works remotely? So then I want to further expand on this and say, like, is it easier to work in a collaborative environment remotely or in person when it comes to these big projects that people are working on?
Um, I personally
I
haven't felt too much of a difference. Like I would say like because a lot of the technologies that you're using are like just on your computer, like we mentioned GitHub for source control. Um, that's the only difference that you get when you're in person is having the ability to like turn around and ask a question of somebody, but at the end of the day with things like Slack and communication channels like that, I would say it's the same. Um, but yeah, when it comes to big projects, I mean, like in my experience, we just hop on a Zoom call and talk about whatever it is we need to talk about, which is ends up being the same as if we were in like the same meeting room or something like that. If anything, we actually save time because you don't have to like walk to the meeting room and and stuff like that. You just kind of hop in a Zoom call real quick, talk about whatever it is you need to talk about, and nowadays there's like technologies that'll like transcribe for you the meeting notes or something like that. So yeah, I found it to be pretty much the same. As you just have to like be more proactive about communication, really. But yeah.
Completely. Louise, is there anything you want to add on to that?
No, I think it yeah, perfectly summed it up. It's about communicating. If you have anything you're stuck with, just get on Zoom, call your managers, your supervisor, project managers, and yeah, I think if you do that, it shouldn't make that big of a difference. No.
Definitely, completely agree with that. Our next question is again from the chat, which is great. I think this is the most questions that we've ever got from the chat that are on topic, which is fantastic. So the next question is, do you think there should be an experience-based decision between dev teams in a tech company? I might throw that one to Ziad. Did that make
What?
sense? I'll repeat it one more time.
Yeah, yeah, but sorry, Olivia, I
That's okay.
don't really like what exactly is meant with experience-based decisions.
I'm trying to think back to when that question was asked, because I'm assuming that was related to what we were talking about.
Mhm.
Oh, he's okay. So he's saying
Oh,
experience-based decisions like
thank you.
juniors talking
All
with
good.
juniors and mid with mid. Okay, yeah, that
Go
kind of
ahead.
Yeah,
makes sense.
okay.
So the question is, do you think there should be experience-based decisions? So I guess what you're asking is like the like juniors talking with juniors and making the decisions on that front. Usually like that kind of goes back to whether you're at a tech company or like a big tech company or a startup. Like in a startup setting, there's less bureaucracy, as I mentioned. So like people are just kind of working together, and usually at a startup like you don't even get this like complex leveling system until later, like when the startup kind of grows and you're thinking more like managers are thinking about like career growth and stuff like that. But when you're in a startup setting, like if anybody has any kind of idea or any like decision on a particular problem that others agree with, it really doesn't matter like whether they're a senior or a staff engineer or a junior or whatever. If it's a good idea or a good product or whatever, it's fine. But when it comes to big companies, like there will be actually like enforced rules in place. Like I'm someone who's considered still like an entry level because I'm like pretty like new to the industry, and there are rules where it's like if you make a certain change that's like big enough, a senior engineer has to be the one to approve it, or like a staff engineer has to be the one to approve it. And this even comes down to like new product ideas or new features or something. It kind of has to like come from above, or like approval has to come from above, and you execute on it. Also, when it comes to like big project, like big projects will usually be handed to like a staff engineer, which is like the highest level engineers usually are at a company. And the staff engineer is responsible for like delegating to all the juniors and the seniors and stuff like that. So it kind of depends on the project and how difficult it is. But just to answer that specific question, like there's usually never a case where like junior developers are only working with junior developers like on another project, or like senior developers are only working with senior developers. Like usually leadership will try to pair like senior developers with junior developers in order to like give mentorship opportunities and stuff like that, and also just to have like a good balance of engineers. Like actually like it's kind of interesting, but managers never want to have like only senior engineers on their team or like only staff engineers. You want to have like a good blend of people who really know what they're doing and people who, you know, are still learning the ropes, because then you can kind of like grow your talent that way. Also, like when you have a lot of smart people in the room, they tend to like argue, and it's hard for like a lot of staff engineers to actually come to a decision. So it's an interesting management style, but like different managers will have different ways of managing that thing.
Completely. And that is why it's a great time to get into tech because everybody still wants those junior developers on their team. So that's fantastic. Awesome. So our next question, it's from the chat. I'm just gonna relate it back to our topic a little bit. So the question is, if you started freelancing, and I'm gonna put this into like a tech, like if you're a web developer freelancer, how do you decide on your hourly rate or project rate? So if you're working with other teams on these massive projects and you're freelancer brought in, like how do you kind of decide on that? Louise, I'll throw that to you.
Yeah, so if you are a freelancer and yeah, you want to decide what hourly rate you want or the project rate, I think there are several things that needs to be taken into account. It's the role depends a lot, but I don't think it's very common that people hire a freelancer to go and be a developer like for at companies. If let's say you are a freelancer on your own and you are doing web development, that like, I think that doesn't relate to the topic, so that's a different thing. But that it comes down to yeah how big the projects are. Most of the time, I see developers charge yeah just based on how big the project will have to be. Like they charge it only if there's like backend functionality and things like that, they usually charge extra for that. If it's only front end, like you just want a website for a blog or a website for a small business, those websites, those developers usually charge less. But I have not heard of cases where a developer is hired by a company to work in a bigger team. Maybe Ziad, have you experienced it like that? That someone has been hired in, let's say, as a
Yeah,
freelancer to do a specific thing.
a lot of companies will hire contractors. I've
Hmm.
had one contractor work for my team before, and usually what it'll be is kind of like what you talked about. Like it'll depend on the scope of the project, and usually the reason a company would even do that is because they know there's just like one temporary thing that needs like a very specific set of like expertise. So we hired like it was like an AWS infrastructure specialist person, and he was like essentially tasked to come help like provision our infrastructure because we were just like spending way too much money on it. And so he came in, and these guys usually don't get like any of the company benefits, so they won't get like insurance, like or bonuses or anything, or like stocks or anything like that. So they'll be paid like a little bit more actually than like an engineer within a company just to compensate for that fact. But it all depends on like the scope of the project, how like complex it is, and also it like just the experience of the person coming in. Like if you're hiring someone to like come hack the iPhone, like nobody in the world can do that. So like that person is going to be paid like a lot of money, right? But if a company is just hiring a contractor because like I mean, the opposite example is that you have like a non-engineering company and they hire a contractor just to come build their like website. They need like a landing page or something like that. Then you know it's a little bit less in demand, so that person won't be paid like as much, and you probably won't even need to hire like a super expert to do something like that. You'll just hire like a React developer as a contractor. So, it really like it's a really dependent thing on the experience and the project complexity itself.
Completely agree. Amazing. These have been really great answers. We're going to ask one more question and then we're going to dip out here for the day and enjoy our Wednesday afternoon or our Wednesday evening for some of us. I want to thank everybody for jumping in and asking all those fantastic questions in the chat. And again, we're here every Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. PST. So my last question is, I want to say like a short answer on a quiz type of question. So say you're starting a brand new project with your company. Let's go with an app. You're starting a brand new app. What does that kind of look like in terms of a highly collaborative environment? So like, do you guys jump on a call? Do you guys, does it involve a lot of management tools, a lot of meetings to kind of figure out like this person has an idea, we're starting this new project, brand new from scratch, we're not building on anything, we're starting it completely new. What does that kind of look like?
Yeah, I would say like something really important to think about is that like if the new project is like a startup, like you're like thinking like I want to build an app and I think it's going to grow and I think it's going to be huge and stuff like that, then you have to remember that the decisions that you make like really early on are going to like trickle down to every engineer that ever works with you. So it comes down to like even like what language you use. So for example, like when I worked at that startup, that startup that I was at was Series D, which means they had around like 1,200 employees by the time I joined. So it was like a bigger kind of startup. And the engineers were like three or 400 or something. But like I could still see the effects of decisions that were made by like the CTO, which was like one of the co-founders, you know? And so there's like a lot of decisions that you have to really think about. You can't just say like, this is the language that we're gonna use, and I don't really know why, but you know, like this is what we're gonna do. No, like you have to really think about what you're gonna do, how you're gonna design your code base. Like I mentioned earlier, you're gonna have if you're building a mobile app, you're gonna have a front end and a back end. Are you gonna have like different repositories for the front end and back end, like different Google Docs? Or are you gonna put everything in one? Are you gonna like how are you gonna actually like structure your folders, for example, like within your code base? Are you gonna have all the APIs and the back end in one folder and all the front end code in another folder, or like all the styles in one place and all the React code in another place? Like decisions like that are actually really important, and you have to think about like how this is going to scale to like a huge engineering organization, because some things work really well if you have like four people working on it, but like is it going to work well if you have 50 people working on it or 100 people working on it? So you know, like when you grow, there are things that you can pivot and like kind of adjust a little bit, but a company like Google can't switch the programming language it uses now for like Google Cloud, you know, or like Google Search. Like there's probably some code in Google that like just hasn't been touched in decades because, you know, it works and they don't want to break it, and this is just how we're going to do things, right? And the decision of what language was used and what file structure was used was decided on by like Larry Page back in 2004, you know? So it's, you have to kind of think about that when you're starting a new project, because I've seen like how that can impact a company negatively and positively.
Completely. That was a fantastic answer. Dweez, is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, not at all.
Just a great
Unless
answer.
the involved parties, unless the involved parties came together and it's like completely from scratch, right? Like they have no idea, like they're starting from zero. I think the first thing you should do is find a problem and solve it, and then build the app.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Completely would agree. I love it. This was definitely one of my favorite conversations that I've had so far with you guys. So thank you for joining today. Somebody asked where they could find these YouTube uploads. It's Practicum. We actually have, I'll throw it in our link in bio today, all of our social media. So if you guys want to follow us on other apps as well. But yeah, if you just search Practicum, I think it's Practicum USA into YouTube, they get uploaded. I listen to them back as podcasts, honestly, while I'm working. So yeah, we'll be here next week at 10:30 a.m. PST. And I can actually tell you that we'll be talking about the impact of technology on society. So that's going to be a really interesting conversation. So feel free to come back and join us. And thank you for supporting us with gifts and questions. Creators, is there any last things that you want to say before we get out of here for the day? Dip out as people have been
thank
teasing
you.
you for.
Yeah. Thank you for all the great questions. I think Ty Engineer and Nadir, you guys have asked amazing questions, and I love I've been chatting with them like in the chat as well. So I really appreciate the questions. You guys are awesome. And yeah, definitely be here next week. We have lots of awesome conversations to have.
Yeah,
Definitely.
definitely.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, we love seeing those questions too. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next week. Awesome. Have a great week, you guys. Bye.
Anyways.